welcome to the next episode of Future Creatives. Now, this is a podcast where I interview changemakers and badass creatives that cross my intersection of dance, theatre, commercial real estate, digital and community. You're going to love this interview. It's one I did with Danielbanks in 2015. And we talk about hip-hop theatre and spirituality and how it relates to community healing and how it relates to and basically respect for the art as well. So it's from a series of interviews that I did with other hip-hop theatre pioneers. Kwesijohnson from Cape Town, South Africa, runs Hip Hop Indaba and Heal the Hood. Anthony Ajaya, that is the artistic director of Sea Revolution. Robbie Graham, artistic director of Southpaw. The OG himself, Quickstep. Now I want you to like, subscribe and share, because that's how we grow and inspire. Because this has been a long time coming, and this is a special treat for all you people that are going to watch this. I've known Daniel now for 7-8 years, long time, and we met at Decibel in Birmingham in 2008, where Daniel was speaking there, and I heard that he got the crowd to start and get their to come together by teaching them some beatbox. And I'm like, I've got to meet this man, because sometimes people that are attend these sort of events that like Decibel that are watching like this find it very difficult to loosen up. But Daniel found a way, and I knew I had to meet him from then. So, Daniel, please tell us a little bit about yourself and how we met. And we've got a few questions that we're going to go through, but just that intro would be great for people out there to kind of know how instrumental you've been.
Well, thank you, Kwesi. I'm humbled and honored to be spending this time with you and with your viewers. We were actually, if I remember correctly, I saw your showcase for, was it Boxing at that point? It was still Boxing, right? Yeah. And I must have been in a conversation with somebody who said, you have to meet this guy, and then they introduced us, and I just remember standing in the lobby of the theater, probably in front of the bar or something, and we just like started talking, and in my memory, like everything else just disappeared. We were just talking and talking and talking, and I think there were lots of people who are trying to come up and talk to you, and you're like, go away, go away. And it was, yeah, I mean, as I think we both know, it was destined to happen. We're definitely kin on some artistic and spiritual level, and I think from then on, then I got an email from your then executive director saying, would you like to come and work with us? And there was no hesitation. It was really funny because she was like, well, if it's okay, and if you've got the time, and da-da-da. I was like, girl, I will make the time. I will I will bring out those bulldozers and make the time. So, and we did, and it was great. And, I learned so much from working with you too, because it was, in a funny way, it was the first time collaborating that deeply with someone who I didn't have a long history with. So, so I also came up against my own questions about how present to be in the room, how much voice, how much to sit back, and you were just like, bring it on, bring it on, bring it on. And I was like, well, I don't know, let me. But certainly by the end of the process, I think we were pretty symbiotic, and we were kind of Siamese twins directing traffic. So
that's a bit of a disaster, but it definitely wasn't. So yeah, Daniel, because that's your introduction, and I'd really like to kind of talk a little bit about the book that you wrote, Sayword, and some of the work you've been doing in Africa.
Great, that's a big question. So Sayword, Voices from Hip Hop Theater, which I happen to have a copy of right here, because you told me you wanted to plug it. So, is the first critical anthology of hip hop theater plays. There's been a previous anthology, a very good anthology that some friends of mine and colleagues edited, but this has a very lengthy introduction with the history of hip hop, the history of hip hop theater. It's actually the first that I know of, the first fully documented history of hip hop theater that mentions all of the early pioneers There were some early pieces that were written by pioneers before they knew about each other, and this one actually brings all of them together. There are 8 plays in the anthology and 1 play online because we wanted to have a very visual storyboard, because it's a beatbox, I guess you could call it a beatbox opera or a integrated beatbox performance with yuribasholane called From Tel Aviv to Ramallah. And very beautiful work, which I believe there's some clips of on YouTube. And there's an introduction that I wrote to each of the sections. And then at the end of the book, because you know, I really wanted this not to be sort of just my voice in between the plays. I wanted more of a collective. I invited some of the pioneers of the movement, such as dannyhock, who founded the Hip Hop Theater Festival, Issa Davis, who was one of the first people to write about hip hop theater, hollybass, who's been a really integral curator of hip hop theater work over the years and used to work with the festival, Sarah Jones, who has also been one of the first hip hop theater performers, and Willpower, who I would say arguably has, in production values, taken the form the furthest. I asked Holly to curate an online wiki with them, where they discussed, they kind of had a dialogue online about the current state of hip hop theater, where it came from, the current state, and where it was going. And so that was, that's actually the last word in the book. So the last word is not my voice, but it's their voices.
Fantastic.
So, and you know, they're close colleagues and people that I've worked with over the years, and whom I've also, you know, learned a lot from. The festival, I wasn't even aware I was doing hip hop theater. I was just doing theater that appealed to me and my generation and my community of artists, and that addressed issues that we thought needed addressing in the language and in the rhythms that we speak in and listen to. And so I got a call in about 2001, I think, from the Hip Hop Theater Festival. They had started in 2002, asking if one of the pieces that I was directing and touring could be part of the festival. And it was interesting because I hadn't really thought in terms of that I was doing hip hop theater. What I thought I was doing, you know, and I actually hadn't heard the term prior to the previous year when the festival started.
Because you have this thing where you say you were making hip hop theater before it had a name, right?
Yeah. So yeah, I was going to say that. So I had been to the festival in the first year, and it was amazing and just inspiring, and the audiences were phenomenal. And I can't remember what I saw that year, but I hadn't, you know, and I knew a lot of the artists and knew them through the theater world, and I had known dannyhock before, you know, when he was just starting out doing his solo work. So I was very excited about this movement, but wasn't really clear that that's what I was doing, because to me, I was just making theater that appealed to my generation, my community of artists, using the rhythms and the language and the sounds and the issues that we were passionate about. And for some reason, I just didn't make the connection that was hip hop theater per se. And so the kamilahforbes, who's the artistic director of the festival, I said, what pieces are you talking about? And she started rattling off a couple of the pieces that I was working on: Goddess City, Ghetto Punch with Anthony Sparks. And I suddenly had this sort of epiphany that the work that, again, my community of artists that we had been struggling to do so hard, and that was not getting, let's say, mainstream attention. I even lost an agent over doing this work because he didn't feel it was commercial enough. I bet he's kicking himself now. He didn't think there was enough money in it, and it was too complicated, too far outside the box for him to figure out how to negotiate contracts and things on.
That's the perils of being a pioneer, right?
So, no, what was I saying about that?
About she was reeling off the pieces that she wanted to come to the theatre.
Right. And so Right. So we were just doing, right. That was what I was thinking. That we were just doing work that was really, I would say, in some ways, being ignored by the mainstream at that time. And I think also the politics of it were probably very challenging for the mainstream, and certainly some of the aesthetics might have been a little challenging. A lot of non-linear work, a lot of very physically based work, a lot of very poetry based work, which is funny that spoken word and poetry based work would be difficult for the mainstream theaters to embrace, because of course they would embrace Shakespeare or something like that, but you know, we know that story.
Whilst you're on that subject, I'm kind of skipping forward in some of the questions, but it's quite poignant that you're at that point. It's like, for me, I wanted to ask you the question: do you think any director can work in hip hop theatre? You know, what makes it unique? What does somebody that's working in hip hop theatre need to be aware of?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I think I would say I would back the question up a little bit and say, what does it take for a director to work in a type of theater that represents a culture from which she or he does not come?
Yeah.
Because I think when you're talking about hip hop theater, you're talking about a culturally specific theater. So as we and culture to me is not just ethnicity. I think gender has culture. I think sexuality has culture. I think geography has culture. Someone from the north directing a southern play, or the south directing a northern play. Certainly, the spectrum of ability. There's just class has culture. You know, how does somebody direct a play across class lines that they may not have information about certain codes within certain classes. And I think what's so interesting is that I don't really think that question has been so rigorously posed around directing Restoration Comedy, or directing Noel Coward, or directing Ibsen. I think suddenly the question becomes this huge sticking point when we're talking about directing across specifically ethnicity, because I still think that, at least in the West, and probably not just in the West, but for the moment I'll just speak about the West because of the UK context and the US context. I think our countries and still have not worked out the legacy and trauma of colonialism. And so our ability to think cross-ethnically is bound up by guilt, shame, rage, violence, trauma. And as we know, when those things are up for us, we can't think clearly. Yeah. So I think that this you know, I think that for you know, as long as there's been actual theater buildings with plays being written and actors acting in them, and directors directing, and designers designing, unless everyone is telling his own story, we are working cross-culturally as directors, always.
Yeah, always.
Now, the challenge is that, specifically with hip-hop theater, or even with theater of the African diaspora or Latino theater, that unfortunately, and it's kind of mind-boggling because of the training that most of us have received as directors, or at least our understanding of our role as directors, people tend to do much less research when they're working cross-ethnically than when they're working, you know, I mean, someone who's directing Restoration Comedy is going to do a lot of research on manners, on gestures. You know, costume designers are going to know exactly how the roughs should be and why the roughs are there and what the stuff is all about, and you know, and yet so huge amounts of resources are dedicated to telling those stories, quote unquote, accurately,
for fear of offending people.
Or just because that's the job
of getting it wrong.
Yeah, I mean, that's the job. The job is to tell the story as best as you possibly can. I don't see, in my experience, directors and writers who are outside of hip hop culture working as hard to understand hip hop, to understand the culture, to understand the cultural circumstances, the history, to understand the aesthetics. You know, if a writer is working with remixing or working with sampling or working with a gestural language that has either popping or locking, you know, as a director, you better know, or a choreographer, you better know the difference between popping and locking. And not just throw something that looks hip hop to you up there, because probably what looks hip hop to you isn't very authentic, because most of what we see, the appropriation of hip hop in popular culture is some watered down version. You know, when you get somebody like yourself or Quickstep and Rockefeller in the US, or Jonesy D, you know, talking about the history of these dance forms and the history of these movements and all of the things that came into them, and really connecting the aesthetics to the politics, because that's the other thing, is that in hip hop, there's nothing aesthetic that does not have some political, you know, relation. Even if the creators didn't think about it that way. I mean, even, you know, the folks who created faders and contemporary, well, I was going to say contemporary DJing, but contemporary DJing is with files now and not vinyl. But, you know, but even the necessity out of which that was created, or the fact that some of those pioneers were in technical schools because they were quote unquote tech tracked, which is something that high schools did and still do, is they decide who's actually going to be able to have a white collar job and who's going to have a blue collar job. And, you know, so some of those early cats were studying electronics and mechanics to be engineers and fix cars and be electricians and things. And they took that knowledge and applied it to the DJ table. And out of that comes scratching, and out of that comes backspinning, and out of that comes beat matching, and out of that comes all the aesthetics of hip hop. So even if they weren't thinking of it politically, in retrospect, we have to understand that that's where it came from. And there's a certain amount of respect that's due for that. So when you put at the beginning of a so-called hip hop theater play, as I've seen, when you put a DJ on stage who is not actually live and is sort of lip syncing, if you will, miming being a DJ while there's some other track that clearly has no connection to what the DJ on stage is doing, you know, so the DJ becomes this cosmetic thing that disrespects the culture, that disrespects the history, that disrespects the work of the pioneers. So if you don't know the gravitas of that history, you might make some choices that you feel are just aesthetic. But if you're making them without understanding the political subtext of those aesthetics, then you're actually disrespecting a culture and people. So I think that the question of respect and understanding what respect means is really important in this work. I think that a lot of times people think of respect in terms of the way that we're raised in the West, of saying please and thank you, and, you know, shutting the door behind you and putting down the toilet seat and those kinds of things. Like that's, you know, that's sort of a surface level of respect. Okay, but I think that to do this work means to engage in a much more profound and deeper level of respect, which really has to do with spirituality and really has to do with you know, one of the things that I write a lot about in the book is the power of the word in hip hop culture, you know, derived from West African Afrocentric notions of the word nomo, the power of the word to actually change the universe. And that if we're not, if as artists, and if the artists who are working with us are not taking the word that seriously, are not taking what we do that seriously, you know, with an understanding, not that we hope that this is going to change the order of the cosmos, but that actually every toe, you know, dipped in the water creates ripples that reach far beyond our view. And if we don't take that seriously, and we don't take our responsibility to our audiences and our responsibility to the people whose stories we're telling that seriously, and we don't have integrity, we're not doing it wholly, which is the, you know, the origin of the root integrity is to be whole, then
Yeah, I think that's a whole other interview about why that I personally think why that's not taken seriously, because if it is changing in the universe and it is changing reality and is bringing people together, all those things, there's a reason why that's not promoted. There's a reason why it can completely change things. And it is when they talk about bringing cultures together and people together, I mean, hip hop brings so many different types of people together. It's on a level where they can begin to create an understanding where I don't know for anything else that does that.
So I think that's, I think that's also perhaps unintentionally or intentionally one of the reasons that this work keeps getting watered down or sort of given to the wrong caretaker, because if it is diluted, then its power is diluted, and then it becomes a commodity that can be bought and sold rather than something that actually has some metaphysical power in the world. And of course, anything spiritual and anything that privileges humanity and privileges peace, which is, we can talk about, the peacemaking origins of hip hop, is going to fly in the face of capitalism, because sort of the unethical side of capitalism is all about exploitation, and we see that widespread, and we allow a certain amount of it. Nobody's boycotted cell phones recently, but the minerals that are mined for those cell phones are part of a global system of exploitation. Probably the technology that we're using here to talk about exploitation has exploited workers somewhere in the world. So there's a kind of a being out of integrity there as well, and I certainly don't know the answer, because I also feel like being completely off the grid doesn't allow a certain kind of work to happen, a certain kind of progressive work to happen, which is very much about being in communication as widely as possible with people. So we have these inherent contradictions, and I think that the hip hop generations are both feel the need to ask these questions and willing to live with the contradictions, and not have there be an easy resolution tied up in a bow. And I don't really know that a capitalist system allows us to live inside of contradictions, because it's very difficult to sell products when there's contradictory information. I mean, I think about, I don't know if you have them in the UK now, but certainly within the past 5 to 10 years in the US, the amount of drug commercials for pharmaceuticals that are shown on TV is astounding. I mean, it's like, I would say 1 out of every 3 or 4 commercials is for a pharmaceutical. And at the end, it's like there's this contest of who can hire the spokesperson who speaks the fastest, or how can they manipulate the recording to speak the fastest to say, side effects may include right? So they have to do that legally, but
I think they use Logic or Cubase and just say the word slowly, and then they just speed it up.
Speed it up, absolutely. But I find it hysterical, because we're a nation of ostriches. Like, we'll listen to all of that, and yet, continue to eat our McDonald's and drink our soda and eat our potato chips and take a drug that might cause blindness or death or suicide. Because we don't want to change our eating habits. Yeah. Those are the contradictions of capitalism.
Crazy.
But I think that something like hip hop theater, which is so fully embodied and asks these difficult questions and has actual bodies in the space. I mean, there are no hip hop theater plays that I think, because again, my definition of hip hop theater has to do with what contributes to the culture, not what borrows or steals from the culture, but what conversations put back into the culture. And there's no piece of work that does that doesn't have actual bodies on the stage in evidence, being interrogated and asked questions about. I mean, in this book alone, Deep Azure by Chadwick Boseman, you have actually a woman who is battling an eating disorder, and she is wrestling with the questions of her body waxing and waning as her love for her mate, who was shot and killed by police, as her grief waxes and wanes. And so there's an actual mapping of her grief through her eating disorder. A Dreamscape by Kirby Hines, similarly dealing with the police shooting, is a young woman on the stage who has been shot numerous times doing a dance at each section. It's an episodic section where the DJ is the coroner, and the coroner is dissecting her body, and she's doing a dance to try to reclaim each part of her body that was assaulted by these police bullets. So we have bodies in evidence. It's not, I know when I was coming up in theater, we used to always complain about talking heads theater, where you have the heads talking and sounding beautiful, but really no bodies underneath them. So this work is incontrovertible. And even if you think today about the hashtag that's used so much in the US about Black Lives Matter, not that all of the plays are specifically about African heritage bodies. There's also plays in this book about Latinos. Obviously, Yuri's play is looking at what happens on either side of the security fence, which is a wall in Palestine and Israel, and those are brown bodies as well, configured differently from perhaps the way that some conversations exist in this country. But these are these are plays that ask the audience to consider bodies in a historical trajectory and what's happening to them today. And it's really about people trying to reclaim their bodies from a system that exploits them, erases them, invisibilizes them, and does constant violence to them, either through microaggressions or very real daily aggressions, large scale aggressions. So I think that's the power of the work, and I think that's also why certain institutions feel they need to water it down by putting somebody in charge who doesn't really fully get it, because to fully get it would be to have the roof blow off the theater. And to fully get it would be to do it in such a way that attracts, that probably alienates a little bit, or they're afraid it will alienate their core financial base, but would attract an entire other audience that they don't really know how to manage.
Or how to get to, or how to
Well,
attract them.
The thing is that all of us as artists, we know how to access that audience, and we walk into the theaters and we say, this is what you need to do to access that audience. And it's funny because we've all sat around and we've had these conversations where we have that conversation, and then they make excuses. Well, we did that with a show 10 years ago and it didn't work. Or, we tried going to church audiences for My Fair Lady and that didn't work. It's just,
to everybody on our mailing list. Come on.
So there are these insane reasons why people won't try the things that we say. So Willpower and Steve and Mildred from Universes, Steve Sapp and Mildred Ruiz and dannyhock and all of these folks tell the stories of when they're at these theaters, whether it be Berkeley Rep or that they're out during the day going into neighborhoods with postcards and doing engaging with potential audiences in that grassroots way, because that's selling mixtapes out of the trunk of your car. I mean, it's the one-to-one, person-to-person hustle and entrepreneurialism, and it's not just about hustling for numbers. It's about, if I'm going to be in the city, and if this theater hasn't done the things that I've recommended, then I'm going to put my money where my mouth is, and I'm going to do them, because this is about ritual. This is about creating ritual spaces, and the power of a ritual space is that it can lead to healing.
Yeah, because I even think that even in those towns and in those cities that you go to, if you had a network of people that were connected to the community, that were, and the theatre was connected to them, then obviously that brings a little bit more validation rather than the theatre trying to just reach to the community, because it doesn't always work like that. But
yeah, I think the reason is that the model of these theaters is a very old model that predates so much of today's social and political realities. And so these theaters essentially, they exist as it's about selling, right? I mean, I'm not criticizing them. I'm just saying this is the model, right? It's not that it's a bad model or a good model. I mean, I don't think it's the most relevant model, but it is a model, which is you have a product, you sell it, and you need to sell it to the people who can buy the product. So if that is the sum total of your business plan, then you have a fiscal responsibility to sell it to make the most money. Now, then you add in a sort of a dependency on funding, whether it be government or foundation funding, and then you start having to, it's sort of like patting your head and rubbing your stomach. You have to now do something new in order to win those funds. And that thing is oftentimes about engaging with underserved communities. But to engage meaningfully with those communities is often in direct conflict with the money-making mission, because you now are serving two masters, you're serving two audiences. And what theaters have been looking for, and I think quite courageously, and it is a trial and error process, and I think some people are doing it, are in a position to take bigger risks than others, or some people just take bigger risks than others, is they're looking to see, is there a Venn diagram overlap between serving underserved communities with, this half of the building and the education outreach. I mean, even the notion of outreach is very colonial, right? But, so now it's being called engagement, but we've just switched up words, but how we actually switched up behavior. And then this side of the theater, which is about selling tickets. So where's the Venn diagram? Where's the overlap? Where's the hallway where the people working in those two kind of very distinct missions get to meet and chop it up and figure out where, how that can happen? But from my perspective, the real problem is that no one's dialoguing with the audiences. A lot of decisions are being made for each of those groups in this sort of patronizing colonial fashion.
There's something that I've not spoken to you about, which obviously we'll do off air, which I'm creating I'm creating a new paradigm for artists to exist in, where you don't need a critic to rubbish your show who doesn't understand it, and you don't need an artistic director of a building to validate that you're good, and you don't need funding to validate that you're good. It's really about the thing that you're talking about the audiences connecting with the artists. And if you can't be facilitated in a building, it's about finding your own. So this is where my kind of love for digital, the arts, and real estate is coming together. So I have a master plan, but I don't know how easy it's going to be to undo that system that exists and kind of promotes those same things that we've been used to, rather than being letting people kind of say, well, actually, this is what we want to see. Rather than you as an artistic director, years ago, before we had the wonders of the internet, culturally, they had people in different parts of the world. They could go, oh yeah, go and take a look at this. They'd be the ambassador for the arts. But now, you just go on YouTube and you type in whatever you want to see. So that authority is no longer there, where they think, oh, what would my audience like to see? Rather than saying, what would you like to see?
I think that's probably why immersive theater works so well for current generations, is that just like with, just how you can surf different sites, which is like going to different rooms, when you have something like Sleep No More, where they've, Punch Drunk has taken over a building, it moves the audience from room to room, and there's a different scenario happening in each room. It a little bit mirrors what it's like to surf. It's just you're doing it with your body and not just with your your house. But I think that's brilliant, Kwesi. The one thing I would say is that my thought, without really having any more information about what you're talking about, is don't worry about the old models, because as time shows, everything cycles, and I think it's our job to create more relevant models, and then those old models will either adapt or they will fold and new things will be built up. I don't see, I think a lot of these institutions are extremely worried about survival. Like,
Yes.
X theater closes,
yes.
that there's some kind of travesty because there will be nothing to serve that community. But I actually think that that's a little bit of, again, a numbers-driven model, a money-driven model, because the reality is that when something old does die, it leaves room for something new to be born. And so I think that part of the challenge is that there are resources out there. I won't say that there are enough resources, but there are enough to do something. But they're being, it's like having programs running in the background on your computer and you just can't use the program you want to use because these other programs are running in the background. I think that you're right, that there are these institutions that are sapping our resources, but I really feel that it's important that we, bless them, let them go with God, let them do what they're going to do, and eventually they will run their own course. And in the meantime, we've been doing our own thing, and this is how a healthy ecology, works.
Yeah.
Is that biodiversity?
Because they've been instrumental in getting us to this point, but actually getting us any further than this point, it might be a struggle for them. Where you say we need new models, we need new ways of doing things in order for it not to be just that word what you were talking about earlier, where everything is kind of just middle of the road,
right.
And you'll put that company on because it's going to sell tickets, but this is the 50th time they've been to the city. It's like, come on. It's like, that an artistic director might not know who a really big Polish punk band is in Poland, but they've got a massive Polish community that live around the theatre.
Right.
Well, how would the artistic director know? Well, if they had some kind of outreach again, but some information about what else is going on for their community and allowing their community to be part of the building. And I think that's always been the desire for a lot of theatres. But like you say, it goes back to the money and the way they can survive. But increasingly, they're going to have to start being more connected to the community because the funding is disappearing.
Right.
Rapidly.
And I'm not, again, I just want to be clear that I'm not slamming these folks for the model that they inherited, because they absolutely, anybody who's in this position has inherited this model. But at the same time, and also I think you and I have both benefited greatly from work in connection with these institutions, both in terms of what we've learned that we've integrated into our own practice, and also things that we've learned through contrast and saying, well, I just wouldn't do it that way. That's just not me. So I don't think it's about that there's a right way and a wrong way, but I do think it's about what's working and what's not working. And if I think you and I have similar priorities, that we understand the sacredness of this work, which goes back to some DNA connection to ritual and orature, and the power of the artist or the shaman or the person in the community that is in some ways the barometer of what's happening in a society. And so we're part of a movement, which I think hip hop and hip hop theater are, to take a hard left on this highway with this Mack truck behind us, and really try to take us back to a place where the arts are directly connected to well-being. And to spiritual well-being, to physical health well-being, to mental well-being, to interpersonal well-being. And so that's just a different, we just have a different, I want to say a different approach, but but maybe we have a different ethos around this. And it's not that our ethos is any better or any worse. This is our birthright. This is what you and I were born to do, and other people were born to do other things. And you know, at the end of the day, I think we just have to be really clear that we're being true to what our purpose is. And not so much worry about whether what other people's purposes are, because I think we spend, I feel like there's so much energy given to attacking other institutions, criticizing them, tearing them down, trying to figure out ways to get them to change. You know, if you think about a romantic relationship, I mean, that's death, you know, trying to get your partner to change. You accept it, and you either, you know, live under the same roof or you don't. And so I, you know, I don't know, I'm in a different headspace right now, especially where I am regionally, where, you know, we don't have we have a few of those big institutions, but they're not, I would say they are far outnumbered by people doing good work on the ground, you know, in rural community settings where people have actual day-to-day needs, water, electricity, health, education. And so it really, it's kind of shifted my thinking about where to put my energies and what to worry about and what not to worry about. Because, And in case folks don't know who are watching this, I live in New Mexico, which is in the United States ranks the lowest of the 50 states in terms of child welfare, and also ranks the usually 49th or 50th in education in the United States. So as beautiful as the land is, and as beautiful as the cultures that occupy this land are, the vestiges of colonialism are such that you know, there are parts of this state that function like a developing nation, still developing, even, you know, with its rich cultural history.
So is there anything you want to close with for this part one?
Sure. I'll just, you know, so Sonia Sanchez is one of the national treasures in the United States as in terms of poetry and political activism. And actually, one of the pieces that that I had been working on that was, you know, considered an early hip hop theater piece was a staged version of her poetry with Nikki Giovanni and Audre Lorde called Spirit to Spirit, that kind of interestingly had this perpetual workshop thing. It never actually reached performance because we kept rotating performers as they got gigs and did other things. But it was this amazing, it had its own, it was a performance in its own right, because so many, it was 4 women, 3 poets and a dancer, and so many people cycled in and out of it that we probably had about, you know, somewhere around 10 or 15 people work on this piece. And so it had its own life as research rather than as product. So anyhow, Sonia Sanchez's first play, I think it's her first play, that she wrote during, or it was an early play that she wrote during the Black Arts Movement, of which she was a major part. The title of the play is But How Do It Free Us? And so the byword, you know, the benchmark that I set in my own life and my own work, and that I share with my students and my colleagues, and when I'm working on a project, is both inside the rehearsal room, outside on the street, on the stage, but how do it free us?
Now don't forget to like, subscribe and share, because remember, that's how we grow, that's how we inspire, and you can be the first to know about new videos and workshops that we're putting out online, and also the podcast. Go visit it, Future Creatives. Enjoy.